Thank Linda and Hannah for organizing this amazing panel and gathering us together, and to you all for attending on a Saturday morning. I have to say that my slides might have suffered slight formatting changes traveling from Windows to Macintosh computer. So if you notice any slight misalignments and formatting mistakes, I'd like us all to pretend that this was my intentional aesthetic choice and not, mistake in transferring files around. So in today's presentation, Frozen Out of Liturgy, Orthodox Christian Aesthetics as Method in Modern and Contemporary Art History, I will engage some of the most prominent art historical texts and objects through the lens of Orthodox Christian understanding of beauty. I will first briefly introduce the methodological framework outlining the stakes of such an approach, then demonstrate the application of this method and conclude with a brief coda. My thinking about Orthodox Christian understanding of beauty and its potential application to contemporary art scholarship begin with this book, Ethics of Beauty by scholar of Christian ethics Timothy Patitsas. As someone who studies art, what attracted me in this volume was Patitsas centering the aesthetic category of the beautiful rather than the true or the good at the heart of Christian theology. Christian ethics, Patitsas writes, must begin with what is beautiful, namely Christ's self-revelation and his resurrection, crucifixion, and incarnation. Patitsas argues that ethics, if defined as rational investigation of morality that is supposed to provide us with a route to good life, says little about the beautiful, leaving out one of the core Socratic transcendentals. Orthodox privileges the beautiful as a leading theological category, stressing the importance of being taken in by the divine eros, an encounter of theophany as participation in Christ's virtue. This centrality of purified sensuality and what gives Christian ethics its unique, as Patitsas calls it, orthodox flavor. He invites us to start with beauty, quote, to begin with feeling, Patitsas explains, not with passionate emotions or opinions, but with purified feeling, the innate ability we have to recognize theophany even in its hidden manifestations. He wonders if faith is a memory of beauty, even a memory of theophany, which grants us with an innate ability to recognize the beautiful in the most unlikely of spaces. And so, to think of the ethical of Orthodox Christianity, one must think beauty first. The image that served as cover art for this book is the 4th century fresco depicting the scene of a woman with blood disease being healed of her malady through touching the edge of Christ's cloak. This story echoes Patitsas' larger theological claim about the role of the beautiful in Orthodox theology. The claim being that the contact with beauty, however small, has a salutary effect on the soul. Beauty heals trauma. Quote, it is appropriate to start the book of Orthodox ethics with the subject of trauma because the Orthodox way is beauty first, while the traumatic event, in contrast, is an experience of anti-beauty, of ugliness first, end quote. Patitsas establishes the dichotomy beauty-ugliness through understanding ugliness as a traumatic encounter that dismantles a human soul. Patitsas is critical of postmodern approaches to the question of ethics as well as trauma, suggesting that they turn away from beauty in favor of truth, divorcing the two. Unlike the beauty-first approach, Patitsas writes, truth-first modes can take the soul apart. They cannot put it back together. But the trauma victim is that person par excellence who does not require any further dismantling. He or she frequently already subsists of division and excommunication. What can further dissection offer such a person, he wonders. I want to imagine what art historical insights we might stumble upon if we adopt the Orthodox Christian notion of the beautiful and its ethical dimension as a guiding methodological device that allows a better appreciation of the religious sensibilities of modern and contemporary art. And what I mean is not so much presence of or allusions to Christian themes, but rather a modern and contemporary art's boundedness to religion, as James Elkins puts it, and it's a time unintended reaction to that boundedness. Or turning to art historian and art theorist Thierry Dodeuve, I want to consider the aesthetic consequences of the loss of belief that underpins humanist articulations of religious themes. To emphasize the stakes of such a methodological experiment, I argue that some of the most enduring preoccupations in the history of modern art are instances of trauma, what Patitsas calls moments of anti-theophany. A traumatic loss of belief in an ordered universe that pushes modernity and postmodernity to, at times awkwardly, reach for beauty that would transcend the pain of excommunication. That is, to reach for the beautiful as something that encourages wholeness and guides us through feeling toward a universal virtue. Now, what would it look like to think through these ideas in the context of modern and contemporary art? When I think modern art, I think Manet's Olympia. The painting art historian T.J. Clark crowns as one of the founding moments of modern art. What makes this painting of a courtesan, black maid, and a black cat definitively modern is the formal manifestation of what Clark calls negation, a capturing of lack of consistent and repeatable meaning in culture. Clark goes so far as to say that Olympia's flatness, the matter-of-fact nature of the work, gives form to the broader cultural absence of finish or coherence. We know that on some level, the viewers of the 1865 Salon, where Olympia met her first audience, recognized this lack. And this recognition resulted in a broader public's violent rejection of the work. Olympia was pejoratively described as, quote, neither true nor living nor beautiful, end quote. Clark reads this accusation of Olympia's ugliness as a reaction to Manet's turning away from the idealized female form that was expected to be seen at the Salon. But the beauty-first approach would encourage us to understand this accusation not only as a voicing of a socioeconomic bourgeois concern, but a collective spiritual loss. While painting Olympia, Manet famously produced two works depicting scenes from the life of Christ. When it came to choose this second canvas for the 1865 Salon, the one that would be exhibited along Olympia, Manet chooses to exhibit a more narrative composition of Christ Scorned, the painting you see on the far right, painted a year after the work you see in the middle, the Dead Christ. And we can understand why he makes this choice. To exhibit these works side by side, one scholar noted, would take away from Olympia's ambiguity and thus her modernity. This comparison becomes a little too on the nose. Indeed, what we're looking at now are two essentially devotional paintings that invite us to behold the life-size bodies that dominate the canvas. The secondary figures tell us how to respond to the main figures, be it with caution, fear, disgust, or deep grief and triumphant tenderness. Both paintings speak about the way in which a human living form can be transformed into something else. In the case with prostitution, the body is turned into currency, into money. In case of Christ's sacrifice, the body becomes the living bread, a site of salvation. Both paintings ask us to behold a body devoid of recognizable signs of life, one more unambiguously than the other. Olympia was often described to be corpse-like, her body pale and dirty, as if having achieved advanced levels of decomposition. In Manet's rendering of Christ, the dead body is what we get. Much like with Christ Scorned, Manet was criticized for stripping away Christ's divinity and presenting only his humanity. And in doing so, Manet paints a cadaver. In looking at Manet's Dead Christ, Thierry Dodeuve locates an articulation of religion's uncertain status in modernity. What this painting helps us to recognize, Dodeuve writes, is that faith for us has become a private matter. to be settled according to individual conscience, and religious practices are no longer the social mortar they once were. It then becomes a personal, subjective work of the viewer to bring Christ back to life, that is, to endow Christ's body with its divinity. Without that subjective choice, what we're looking at is a dead, traumatized body. But the consequences of this choice become arbitrary in the world where Jesus Christ, taken down from the cross, can be as much a subject of devotion as a prostitute negotiating with a customer. The naturalism that so masterfully communicates the death of Christ's flesh, the absence of the otherworldly, the divine, is not a purely modernist approach to the theme. Increasingly naturalistic depictions of Christ's body have adorned Western churches since the beginning of Enlightenment. This 15th century Crivelli work, for example. Much like with Manet, we are looking onto a physical space with deep shadows and gravity pulling down on a lifeless body. Christ's corpse has to be propped up by helping figures, drawing our eyes to the naturalism of his wounds. In contrast, an Orthodox depiction of Jesus after crucifixion intentionally deploys abstraction to hold on to the divine beauty. The highly stylized and dogmatic visual language of Orthodox iconography holds simultaneously Christ's two natures, fully human and fully divine, giving form to what is beautiful, thinking back to Patitsas' words, Christ's self-revelation in his resurrection, crucifixion, and incarnation. Orthodox iconography does not flatter our scientific thinking, but encourages our theological sensing, our feeling for the transcendental, the healing, the beautiful. The Orthodox icon purposefully distances itself aesthetically from our everyday, which is not to say that it holds us at a distance. In Orthodox worship, icons are deeply engaged with objects. They are bowed to and kissed, spoken with, and carried around during celebrations. An uncharitable way to understand this type of engagement would be to say that an icon is a theatrical object, that it relies on the viewer for its function, having a meaning only in the context of the theater of liturgy. Theatricality, we know, is yet another issue in art historical scholarship theorized by art historian Michael Fried, writing about minimalist art in 1960s. And here is an artwork that Fried writes about, and I'm interested to think through this comparison. Both objects on the screen reach out to the viewer. Both objects encourage abstract thinking about a visual, material, and aesthetic paradox. And yet, one of these objects contradicts itself to the point of resisting contact. It seems to recognize and purposefully reject the possibility of communion. Carefully staged, the Corot sculpture on the right manipulates us into reaching out toward it only to reject us. The beautiful is present through its absence, paradoxically, because we are made to miss it. We're made to miss the beautiful. And we miss it because beauty has the capacity to integrate us with the object, much like the divine eros allows us to become one with Christ. Much like Clarke's negation, Fried's critical notion of theatricality points to a traumatic event in modern and contemporary art, a rupture in our ability to relate to the art object, to relate to others, and perhaps to relate to ourselves. For Fried, art's autonomy and self-reliance is the answer to the problem of theatricality. This self-reliance is self-contained and non-critical, capable to articulate artwork's value without relying on what lies between the arts, without relying on that relationship between the viewer and the artwork. For the sake of time, I'm not staying with Fried much longer, but I just wanted to situate his ideas in this framework to imagine possible future readings. Readings that would attempt to exercise the beauty first way as a recognition of modern and contemporary art's formal instances of trauma and its structural attempts at remedying it. Simply put, to approach modernism beauty first, one could ask, In what way do these works fail to be icons? And icons in an orthodox sense, objects in the world that reach out for a relationship with us, that reliably provide refuge. To ask this question does not mean to assume that every work of art strives to be an icon or consciously desires to participate in our spiritual life. This approach, however, recognizes that beauty is shared by both the attitude of faith and the attitude of taking art seriously. And so the methodological implications of such an approach are twofold. First, it lays the ground for a productive reintroduction of the category of beauty into the field of contemporary art scholarship without denying its uncertain standing in the field today. Second, it allows to both challenge the conclusions of secular contemporary art writing and appreciate it for its insights that ring true beyond their sophisticated theoretical frameworks. And in the last few minutes that I know I have left, I want to return to Timothy Patitsas and share an anecdote from the Ethics of Beauty volume that I think brings both a better understanding of him as a scholar and hints at the expansive scope of the beauty first method. So a surprising but an enduring presence throughout the book, throughout the Ethics of Beauty, is an American urban writer and activist, Jane Jacobs, who championed new community-based approach to city planning and criticized the post-war efforts to rebuild urban environments that focused on fighting gang violence and destitution instead of supporting already existing rhythms of communal flourishing. So Jacobs says, instead of going into the community and seeing what goes wrong and focusing on fixing that, focusing on the negative and imposing certain frameworks just to fix the problems in the community, you instead need to go into the cities, go into the neighborhoods, see what works, see how life organically organizes itself for its own flourishing, and then build around that, like follow that principle. And you can see why Patitsas would be attracted by this, because it is a beauty first approach, right? So Patitsas reads her work and sees in her arguments about city organization a kind of liturgical rhythm. And he ends up even writing his graduate thesis on the idea of city as liturgy. In the course of their friendship, and they develop an enduring friendship, at one point Patitsa gifts Jacobs an icon of Panagia. This is an icon of a Mother of God. I don't know what exactly that icon looked like. It could have looked something like this. Jacobs reportedly hangs it atop her writing desk, and in the process of working on a book about the fall of civilizations, she shares with Patitsas the following insight. And this is Patitsas recalling a conversation he has with Jacobs. She said in a very serious tone, quote, "That icon you gave me, it's on the side of the right. And I don't mean political right. I mean, whatever force is trying to destroy civilization, that icon is against it." And then Patitsa says, then she catches herself because she senses that she articulated things in too religious a language. So he comes back to kind of clarify, saying, I mean, whoever painted that icon understood the forces trying to bring down civilization and how to block them. Jacobs was a secular scholar, agnostic in her private life, and yet her reading of the icon opens Patitsas onto an insight his theological training seemed to have fallen short of providing. That is, an insight of the peculiar power of an icon. Apologies, this is the follow-up. The peculiar power of an icon, an artwork of religious art that invites us to prayer, contemplation, and concentration on what is beautiful. Jane Jacobs made me realize that it was as if they, and by they he means people who wrote the icon, they had put everything the human race had ever learned about the importance and fragility of civilization and about how to defend civilization into these works of art. He then continues, you see, spiritual insight can come from unexpected places. and it often does. That's the whole point of theophany, as being a gift rather than a result of our efforts. And what I want to propose is the beauty first method. What it does is orient us to be better situated to receive that gift. Thank you.
Thank you.